Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour. This is your host, Bill Frezza. We're here in Antigua, Guatemala, in the courtyard of the Hotel Casa Santo Domingo, talking to participants in the Antigua Forum, an annual conclave of market reformers. Our guest for the second part of the show is Oliver Porter, founder of Contract Cities, a citizen volunteer turned entrepreneur looking to help municipalities gain control of their budgets and liabilities through a unique structured contracting program. Oliver, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure.
My understanding, Oliver, is that you are setting out to change the way local governments run their business. Tell us the premises.
The premise is that we've been doing government at the local level the same way for 100 years or more in this country. Basically, you hire employees, you buy equipment, you do all those things, and it has become a bureaucratic morass. It is inefficient. It is not providing good service. So we've provided an alternative model that does provide both more efficiency and more responsiveness to the public.
And so, in a sense, you're analyzing local governments as a business, and you're having them provide their services in new ways. Why don't you describe a little bit about how that started and what the results have been?
It began for me in the year of 2005 when we incorporated my home city of Sandy Springs, a city of about 90,000 people at that time, and we started that city, that new incorporated city, with only 2 employees.
Well, what do you mean by started that city? So the people were already living there. Who was providing government?
Yeah, existing community. The government was provided by the county, the largest county in Georgia, 60 miles long, split in 2 by the city of Atlanta, very unwieldy to manage. It was providing poor service, and we were being singled out as the largest taxpayers in the area. So the money was generated in our area and swooshed out of town. You could almost hear the whoosh as it went to go to another part.
So you were being milked?
Yeah.
And did you secede from the county?
No, we didn't. That's an often asked question. We're still a part of the county. In fact, we still pay 85% of our property taxes to the county. And with that other 15%, we've been able to do miracles.
And how did that work? You incorporated a new city?
We incorporated. We fought for almost 30 years. In Georgia, cities, counties are creatures of the legislature. So we had to get legislative approval, not to form the city, but to simply have a referendum, a vote by the people as to whether they wanted to have a city or not. So finally, with the change of the administration in the Georgia House, we finally were told late in 2004 when the election that this was going to be bill number 1 for the new legislature.
So the people, it was a popular sovereignty movement, declared themselves a city. They didn't secede from the county, so it's a city within a county, which is normal.
Right.
Do they get any county services?
Schools were not allowed to be part of it because it passed a bill some years ago that there could be no more city school districts, newly formed ones. So we'd love to have been able to take our schools. But schools, the welfare, the libraries, and the sheriff's operation stayed with the county.
And what did the city pick up in terms of services?
City picked up eventually police, fire, municipal courts, administration, human resources, finance, IT being a big one, purchasing.
Garbage?
We franchise garbage, but we are responsible for it. But we had 5 companies at that time, private companies already doing it. So we simply franchise them, which gives us the right to be sure they meet standards, but the payment for the services is directly to the private companies.
And this newly formed city got its tax revenue from where?
We get it from basically 3 sources, about a third each. A third of it is property taxes. I'll come back later what we've done with that. A third of it is an allocation of a state sales tax. And the other third is made up of about 21 line items. There are all types of fees, franchises, fines, hotel, motel taxes, things, a whole array of those.
That are under the control of the city now.
They're all under control. So a third of our revenue from that miscellany, a third from property tax, a third from sales tax.
And how did the citizens see the burden of their taxes change when they incorporated themselves as a new city?
Didn't change 1 mil. The property tax remained exactly as it had been under the county, and we have not raised it now in 8 years, right through the recession. I'll just jump ahead and say the results have been terrific. No increase in taxes. We've been able to devote 20% of our operating income to capital improvements, paved over 150 miles of roads when the county had paid 10 miles in the previous 20 years, new sidewalks, new parks, some of them award-winning, all out of the operating budget, so we've not had to acquire
sounds
any
too
debt.
good to be true. And how many employees?
And it's not over yet, but created a surplus in that time of $45 million.
An investable surplus?
Yes, against an operating budget of about $70,000. So that's a significant surplus while paying 20% of the in capital improvements.
So this is a
and here's the real beauty when you think about the problems across the country: zero long-term debt and zero liability for pensions and other benefits.
How many employees does the city have?
We began it with 2. Everything was under contract with private industry other than public safety. And we did not, in the first months of operation, we wanted to establish our police force as city employees, police and fire. So we were able to establish a new police force in 6 months and a new fire department in a year.
And these are city employees?
These are city employees.
And
the two that I related is all other services. I started itemizing some of them. Additional services, of course, transportation, meaning both traffic design and control, road maintenance, sidewalk maintenance, parks and recreation, community development, which encompasses planning, zoning, permitting, code enforcement, and an array of other smaller services. All of those are were provided under contract with one company at that time, who had many subcontractors, of course, because no one company does all those functions. Yep. The new city actually was incorporated by legislative law at 1 minute after midnight on December 1st, 2005. At that moment, the newly elected council sat for the first time, and they had a fully operational city in place for them to manage.
So all the contract bids happened in the months prior?
All the contracts happened in the months prior. The amazing aspect to that is that the company that was eventually selected through a competitive bid process actually had to do that at their own expense. They spent upward to $5 million to set up the city without a contract.
They bet on the come.
They actually did. There was a tremendous amount of trust involved on both sides. The city had to trust that they would be able to do it. They had to trust that they would eventually get the contract, which they didn't get a signed contract until about 3 weeks after the city began. So they had made an amazing commitment, I think, to do this. It began earlier.
Can you tell us the name of the firm? I mean, that's a brave and visionary thing to do.
Of course. CH2M Hill, primarily an engineering firm out of the Denver, Colorado area. They're an international firm, well known around the world. The guy who headed the effort in Sandy Springs, his next job was managing the contract in Dubai for the future city that they were going to build there, and a futuristic city, domed.
Wow.
And then he went from there to managing the security for the London Olympics.
Okay, so they know what they're doing at scale.
They know what they're doing.
And yet they saw this as an opportunity. Why?
It is a huge potential market. If the market that I have targeted for this alternative form that I'm calling contract cities, I estimate to be about $90 billion in the U.S. alone. The Japanese, when I was working with them, estimated theirs at about $110 billion, so we obviously use some different assumptions. But it is a huge potential market for private industry to open up in the U.S.
And basically, at the behest of elected leaders, provide services that are normally provided by public employees.
Exactly.
Was anyone thrown out of a job as a result of this?
Well, not in this case, because it was a new city. People should have lost their jobs at the county because we removed the burden for all those services from them, from almost 100, and now it is 100,000 people. But they didn't lay off anyone, and that's the problem with bureaucracies.
Yeah, that's their issue. Bureaucracies never get smaller.
Now, with an existing city to convert to this model, and that's where we need to be going, there is obviously an existing employee base that should be and is concerned about their jobs. I understand that. That's nature. But there are things that we already know and have tried that can mitigate the impact on those existing employees.
Let's come back to that when we get a better understanding of this whole process. So who wrote all the RFPs? Who set the bid system up that attracted the private contractors to offer all these services?
I did. That sounds That's not an egotistical statement. I sat in my basement office and did it. It might be useful to know, Bill, I had no government background. So when I accepted...
Whatever possessed you to do this?
Stupidity. I had been involved with the committee that had been seeking to get approval for a city for many years.
Did you live there?
I do.
So you were basically a concerned citizen that got sucked into this.
Exactly that. And
well, there's democracy for you.
Yeah, and I had asked the question back several years earlier, if we ever got this thing approved by the legislature, and assuming the people would vote for it, how would we actually start the city?
You'd be the dog that caught the bus.
Yeah, exactly. I've used that phrase so many times. And everybody said, well, we'll
figure it out when we
worry
get
about
there.
that. Yeah, we got to get this bill for. So I went home in frustration from one of the meetings and sat down with a yellow pad and drew up a plan for how to start a city. Timelines and critical paths and,
services
all of that sort of, for all the services, identified the services. And so
under the constraint of no new taxes.
Yeah. And so and that was not a legal constraint. That was our commitment to the community.
Sure. A political promise that was actually kept.
Yes.
That's pretty rare.
Yeah. And still is being kept to this day. In fact, the charter that I chaired the Charter Commission, the charter specifies that taxes cannot be increased without a referendum. The council cannot increase the property taxes.
Wow.
Yeah. That's kind of nice. But having written this plan, the committee passed it, and we didn't get the bill that year. The next year I put a new date on it and
tried again.
Committee passed it, and we didn't get the bill. And the next year, all of a sudden, there was a change in the House of Representatives, and we were going to get the bill. And everyone sort of looked around, everyone being the committee, at me and said, oh my God, where's that plan?
Pull it out of your drawer and let's go.
So I said, well, it's a very rudimentary plan, but I will take responsibility for implementing it under this condition, two conditions really. You've got to give me a title because I'm having trouble getting people to talk to me in other cities. I'm just, nobody. So they named me interim city manager. But the important condition was we have no time now. We only have months to actually start the city, and we can't do it by committee. If I'm going to be in charge, I have to be in charge.
Get out of my way. I'm coming through.
And reluctantly,
they let you do it.
Reluctantly, they agreed, and so I am now interim city manager with absolutely no government experience, trying to start a city. I did the natural thing, which was created task forces of volunteers to focus on the 12 areas of service I had identified. And they began their work, and after about 2 months, I reached the point of realizing it was impossible to create a traditional city service. The legislation provided no authority, no funds, no staff, of course, but no authority to anyone to hire anyone, sign a lease, buy equipment. So how do you go from having no authority to do anything minute, and 1 minute later you have to have a fully operational city? So realizing that, I began basically just quietly on my own to investigate alternatives. My career had been in the corporate world, so I had a lot of knowledge of the abilities of large companies to
get things done,
to move mountains when they wanted to. So again, on my own, without anyone knowing, I wrote letters to 24 international firms I had identified, and I knew enough from my old corporate life to go in at the CEO or president level, not try to start, because I didn't have time to go work the way.
Right.
24 of them, and I asked them two, very short letter, very simple. I asked them two basic questions. Here are the 12 areas of service I'm interested in. Where have you ever done that? In a city, and if not that, the county, the military, whatever. And then
you're vetting them.
Then the second question was, because I really needed to know if it was even possible. The second question was one to really warm the hearts of CEOs is, would you be willing to spend the millions of dollars to start this city without a contract? Because I can't offer you one. No one has the authority to offer a contract.
Right.
Well, 12 responded, actually. And I was able to create a matrix of companies and services. And from that, I was sort of guaranteed to myself that I could have enough bidders who had done it to make it worth going forward. The second question, would you do it without a contract? No one said yes. No one. The best I got was, well, we can talk about that, or maybe something can be negotiated. I took that as a yes and proceeded to my basement office and began to write RFPs.
Okay.
And I created some massive RFPs for the services. Then our pro bono lawyers said you can't issue them. You don't have the authority to even issue them. I still to this day disagree because we were not guaranteeing a bid to anyone.
Right.
In fact, alerting them very specifically we couldn't. We were
If
just
a contract,
asking
if a contract
if
happens,
a contract,
this is what it
what it looked like.
Yeah.
So there was a clause that the governor was to appoint a 5-person commission to assist in the incorporation of the city. It had no authority, but it had the governor's name. The governor appointed the 5 people. Unfortunately, 4 of them had nothing to do with the organization of the city.
Right. Political appointees.
Two of them didn't even live in the city. The 5th one was myself. They asked me to convene the meeting. When I did, it became readily apparent that I was the only one there who knew anything about it, and so they elected me chairman. So now I'm in the enviable position of presenting things to myself as from city manager to, which did expedite the matter. And on that at that first meeting, on June 29th, now we're going to have a city December 1st.
Yeah.
June 29th, I put a stack of RFPs in front of them about 2.5 inches thick. And I said, I pulled a Nancy Pelosi.
You did.
I said, you got to pass.
Sign these to find out what's in it.
You don't have time to read these. You must sign them now. But I did give them one option she did. I said, there's nothing here that we cannot change by amendment. And secondly, I must tell you, we have no time. You must do this. And they were a bright group of people, and they did. And the next day I issued RFPs.
And how many respondents did you get?
We had 41 companies show up for the mandatory pre-bid meeting.
No kidding.
Now, I have to say many of those were just niche companies hoping to find a piece they couldn't stand up. But there were sufficient large companies who could do it. And if I could digress a second, a large part of my effort over the following years has been to find companies because they don't realize they can do this. It's not
a new market. There's
new
not
market.
A market model for them, but with a $90 billion TAM, total available market, you should be able to attract somebody.
So we have. And, quickly I say to them when I meet, they say, well, really, we don't do that. And I say, yeah, but do you do administration? Do you do HR?
Right.
Do you do finance?
Right.
On that. And they say, yeah. And, okay, you don't do paving of roads, but do you do project management? Well, yeah. Then this is
Can
no
they fill
more.
potholes, right?
This is project management. These are going to be subcontractors, and you will be managing them. And it turns out companies are better at managing subcontractors than governments are.
Sure. Yeah, there's accountability. There's no patronage. Let me pause a moment and see if I got this right. You're like the starlet that was discovered after 30 years of hard work. So after 30 years, you have 6 months to build a city with questionable authority. And from a standing start, 2 minutes after you get started, you've got a budget of what?
We've got a budget of initially about $50 million. It's now at $70 million.
So you're running a $70 million city. You've put $45 million in the bank. Taxes haven't gone up a penny,
right.
And citizen satisfaction is where?
Citizen satisfaction is excellent. We have done surveys, of course, the things you do. We've been involved in national surveys in which we came out in the top 10% of cities in that area. But probably the best indicator of customer satisfaction, citizen satisfaction, was the first elections that followed 4 years after the original ones.
Okay.
The least vote any incumbent got was 84%.
Most politicians would kill for that.
Yeah, and by the way, we won the referendum to have a city by 94%. Which
people were ready.
One of the county commissioners who were not real happy about the whole thing declared was not a mandate.
No, 94% is not a mandate.
Yeah.
So, Oliver, this had to have been a fluke. There's no way this could have happened more than once.
One would think so, but of course the truth of the matter is that we have been replicated now 5 times. And in each case, the committees working on those cities came to me and asked me to be their principal advisor to give them the same model.
Which you did what, out of the goodness of your heart?
Yes.
This really happens?
Yes.
Did you retire wealthy?
No. I was a vice president with AT&T. I was comfortable. I retired quite early, and I went to my family, and they agreed and said, I said, I think I can support you for the rest of our lives. But
so this is basically
I'm not a wealthy person.
It's basically a hobby.
I say it's not a vocation; it's an obsession. So yes.
So you did this 4 months. You got 5 of these running now.
Yeah.
All in Georgia.
Yeah.
All newly incorporated.
Yes.
And if you look at that opportunity, because that's the easy one, because you're not kicking any unions out of work, what's the total available market for that?
Well, right now there are 5 additional ones in that area under consideration. They are in the process of trying to get through the legislature. Now, once we broke the ice,
Right.
it's been much easier for them to do it. And they don't assume, at this point, they all just assume they're going to follow our model, the Sandy Springs model.
So what makes Georgia so special?
Well, every state has different laws with regard to these things, but nothing in terms of will this work is special in Georgia except this. If you're in a state that has had traditional union domination and laws have been passed, for instance, New Jersey, a very enlightened township leadership came to me. I have a quick set of list of things. I say, well, check these qualifications. And one of those is, do you have any legal obstacles to replacement of employees? And they came back. They didn't know it originally. They came back and said, well, it turns out that if we do away with a job, a position, we have to pay the incumbent for 2 years for not working.
Oh, it's France.
Yeah. And I said, then I can't help you.
They're out.
They're out. So fundamentally, I don't look for any opportunities in the Northeast or sort of some of the Midwest where there has been strong union domination that has created legislation that,
So it's a hopeless cause there.
Yeah, it is until they can get a change. So maybe that leaves about 30 states or so that are still
that could become contract cities.
Can become contract cities and should become contract cities, in my opinion, because we have this excellent track record. And I have been, this may sound a little egotistical, I don't know, but I sort of call myself the Johnny Appleseed of local government.
Let me ask, I understand that you're about to turn this hobby or obsession into a business. Tell us about that.
We've reached a point where basically operating as an individual, I just can't expand it. I won't live long enough to expand it rapidly enough. So I need a partner, and eventually I need a successor because I'm getting along from an age and health standpoint where I need someone. So I've been looking for that. But to do that, the caliber of person I need, I can't afford to do it for free the way I do. So I'm going to have to raise some funds to do that. I need a company formed an LLC, and we are looking for various sources to fund.
And the name of this company is?
Currently, the LLC is Public-Private Partnerships Associate, but we're going to be doing business as contract cities.
Contract cities.
Yeah.
And you're looking to build a team and raise money and basically turn the establishment of existing cities and newly incorporated cities and the model you've created and make that a business.
Yes.
How do you see that playing out, and where do you go next? I mean, you've got Georgia going. What happens next?
Well, we're focusing next on Texas. The political climate, the psychology there, and the fact that it's a huge state with a couple of hundred cities, over 100,000 there. My target market for these conversions is cities of 10,000 to 250,000.
Okay, so you've got it bounded from...
And it's not impossible to do it. I've done a smaller even, but it has to take special arrangements. For one thing, it's not a large enough contract to interest the type of company.
And you're not going after Houston.
No. Above 250, I'm sure you can do it, but the complexity of doing it, the politics involved in the doing of it, and all just become a heavy burden.
Sure. But the idea of no tax increases, generation of surplus, and no long-term unfunded liabilities. I mean, we are facing a municipal and city time bomb.
Exactly.
And our unfunded liabilities. I mean, this has got to be extremely attractive to anybody that can do arithmetic.
Yeah. I'm frequently asked, well, isn't it easier to do a new city than an existing city? And my answer to that is absolutely not. Think about the complexity of starting a city versus just being able to go in and change some things with an existing one. What is the problem with existing cities is one thing. It's called politics.
Yeah.
Existing elected officials are very reluctant to stick their necks out. They were elected under one system.
Right.
Why should they make a radical change, even if it's to the benefit of their citizenry?
That could impact their incumbency.
Yeah. And then the second is, of course, a concern of the existing employee base, and that, to me, is a legitimate.
What do you do with them?
Yeah, there are ways to mitigate the impact on them. I don't know if we have time to discuss many of those, but for instance, one county I studied, I said to them, what is your attrition rate? Meaning, how many people do you normally lose?
What's the normal turnover?
Yeah, and it was 10%. So I said, okay, I can write your RFP any way you want, and why don't we put in the RFP that the company must offer employment to 90% of your existing employee base.
Under their terms.
Under their terms.
You become an employee of the new
become an employee of the new company.
Not a civil servant anymore.
Absolutely not.
With their benefits and pay, whatever
their benefits and pay and all of that. And make that requirement for 1 year. Now, that's going to cost you some savings because they probably wouldn't offer to 90. They might offer 75%.
Right.
So that's going to cost you, but it'll give time, a year's time, for the company to look at those employees and make its own decision as to whether they're carrying their weight. And at the end of that year, when they make that decision and maybe someone is laid off, it's sort of not on the city anymore. It's the private employee. Politically, it is not. Now, that's, you may say, well, that's just a little sleight of hand. Well, it's not. The real value there is that year of observation that they get. Each city would be a case-by-case basis. Working in Japan, I had come up with a proposal for a city of 50,000 there that they were very interested in doing, and we got well down the road until the tsunami and earthquake hit, set everything back, and then the next year the mayor lost his seat, and he'd been the proponent of it, not because of this, but for other reasons. He lost his seat, so it kind of came to an end. But the point there was they had a city of 50,000. They had an industry moving in, fortunately, that was going to employ about 3,000 people. And I said, okay, are you giving any incentive to that company to come? Yeah. Well, all right, then we have some leverage. Let's say to that company that you must, as your first employees, offer to our displaced employees, and we will put in a retraining program to train those employees for your specific job needs. So it's a win-win. The company gets trained employees, you get displacement. So, not many cities would have that optimum. That's the sort of individualization you have to do in each city to be as fair.
It's a bit of a custom job on a case-by-case. And you can pick and choose who you want to do business with. For example, what do you do with the inherited deficits and unfunded liabilities? Do you just basically rule out the ones that are hopeless?
Of course, in a new city, you don't have them.
Right.
But in an existing city, think about what happens. You're looking at your pension plan. You're going to be moving people off the payroll. If they are not vested, they're going to the private company. If they're not vested in the existing plan, basically you just wiped out that requirement.
Potential liability. Yep.
If they are vested, you have frozen the level of that future obligation.
So that you have the obligation, you have to discharge it, but you're not piling on.
But you're not piling on. And, of course, in most of the plans, the last few years is where all the money is, they call it spiking, load into all sorts of things. So you can significantly cut future liabilities of the existing city in that way. In the study I did for a county that was a large county, over a